This is on page 95 in the International Edition. This one is an example of where you can combine the waist dart with the shoulder dart. I need to tape that one back together. So these two have been combined. This one is cut all the way up to here, and then they're both closed, and that works because there's added fullness at the bottom. And then this one has something similar happening that's decorative. So both of these include the shoulder dart in a decorative way so that they can be combined. I'm going to show you how to do the multi-dispersion one at the bottom of the page. And this one typically gets a little bit confusing, so go back and rewind if you need to, and then there's other variations at the bottom of the page. But the idea behind this one is to get rid of the shoulder dart so that you can't see it even though it's still there. So I think this one's easier to see if I slash and spread, but if I color it in so you can see where it went, that will work too. So the book is doing slash and spread. Pivoting. So I'm going to do pivoting, but I'll color it so that you can see it both ways. So I've just taken it and I'm tracing it on the paper, and I accidentally moved it. And with the vantage point you've got, you can see the mistakes I make better than I can. Okay, so our back is on there. The idea behind this one, I'm going to zoom in, we're mostly going to be doing the top. Yep, car sick. So this is the original dart. I'm going to color it in yellow. That's the original dart. We're going to move that so that it's in 3 equal sections, and we're not going to sew it. We're going to control it with a separate pattern piece. So in order to control this dart, I'm going to start by tracing myself a facing out of the original pattern. So this is a separate piece that's going to be sewn on the inside of the neck. It's going to control the ease that we're putting in, and I'm just making it as wide as the middle of the shoulder. Sometimes you might end up with it a little bit differently, but in order to finish that, I'm going to measure how wide I made it, and that happens to be 1 1/16 inches. So for convenience, I'm going to shorten it a little bit and just make it be 1 inch. And I'm going to measure all the way around the edge and make this facing 1 inch wide. And most of you have worn things with facings in them. They're less common now, but if you've got a jacket or a coat, sometimes a blouse, they'll have a facing on the inside that will finish. And you sew some of those in beginning sewing class. So this is my back neck facing, and that would be cut on the fold. And typically a back neck facing, we're going to make this a little bit smaller. Back in the day when we wore more facings, it was more obvious, but this little piece on the inside would try to take up as much space as the outside. And then it would ripple underneath on the inside of your clothes. So typically we would take out an 1/8 of an inch, but I'm only going to take out a 1/16 because this is half scale. So I'm going to leave this exactly the same, and then I'm going to taper it and take out just a little bit of extra so that when it's on the inside, this part that's on the bias will stretch out a little bit and it will stay in position. Okay, so this is our neck opening, and it's going to sew to that neck opening, so I'm going to add seam allowance to it. And this won't work if you don't have your neck facing, because this is the control piece. Fullness is usually controlled somewhere. Well, it's always controlled by something. If I were going to line this all the way through and put a lining on the inside, I would need to add seam allowance here. But it's just going to be a facing, so I'm not going to add seam allowance. I'm just going to cut it off there. So we have seam allowance on the neck edge and on the shoulder edge. And this is on the fold. So back neck facing. And I'm abbreviating facing. And that will be cut 1 on the fold, size 8. Okay, back to this piece. This is going to sew to here. This is the original size of the neck, because that's the size it needs to be to fit. But right here, we're going to add a little bit, subtract some from here, and we're going to put some into the armhole. So if I measure down that 1.5 inches, I'm going to come down to here and draw my perpendicular line, perpendicular to the center back. And going to extend that line out. And this one isn't going to be sewn in, so I need to put it in the neck, but I'm not concerned about aiming it into the other dart like I did when I was doing the princess line. So if I were doing slash and spread, I would cut down all 3 of these lines, but I would leave it attached right here. Since I'm going to pivot, I'm going to divide this into 3 equal sections. So this is just bigger than 1/4 of an inch. So I want to divide that into thirds. So I'm going to take the first third and put it over here, and the last third and put it over here, and leave the middle one. So, just for fun, this section is going over here. And this section is going over here. And because I'm doing that, it's going to be easier for you to see if I don't have the shoulder seams drawn in, because those are going to change. If you would rather do this as slash and spread, go ahead. Okay, so we've got it back in its original position. I'm going to, I need to be able to see that. and I'll mark it right there. So I'm going to rotate this closed so that it opens over here. So I've just added a tiny bit, and it's coming over there and connecting with the yellow section. So this little bit that I added is going to be right there. So now our neck is too big by that not quite 1/8 of an inch. And I'll do the same thing over here. It's always safer when you carefully, and see, now I can't line this up over here anymore because it doesn't match. So I'm lining up everything else very carefully. So this is where it's going. I'm putting my pencil there and closing that so that the green section is covered. And then I'm continuing around and ending here. So that means that I've made the armhole just a little bit too big too. So when you sew the sleeve in, this is just going to sneak in right there and nobody's supposed to notice that it's there. This is gone. And this is gone. So when you've got something like this, you can't redraw this line to be straight. Do you see how that's not straight? It's not straight. If I try to redraw that so that it's a straight line, then I lose some of my space. And on a full scale, that's going to show more. I'm going to make sure that I got that the way I wanted it. Yeah, probably moved it a little bit. Okay, so that should be up there. So that, instead of being a straight line, now has to be curved because that contains part of the shape. So this line, instead of being perfectly straight, is keeping the curve because that's where part of the ease has gone. So I've just blended that with the curve, and then this will sew into our front shoulder. And the front shoulder will control that, so it's a little bit too big, but this is where learning how to ease comes in. You'll pin it right here, and you'll move it over and pin it right there, and this will go on with the feed dogs, and you'll just kind of pull on it a little bit. We're not supposed to stretch it, just tug on it so that it's eased in, which doesn't leave it permanently stretched. So then the front shoulder controls that piece, and the back neckline that we made first is going to control this one. In this case, we can't leave that bump there, so I am going to blend it between the two. But usually what happens is you cut off a little bit of the low side, the high side, and add a little bit to the low side. So I've blended it, so that's going to be my line. So I'm going to cut out those two pieces and we'll look at them together. So sometimes when you're patterning, you're sneaky. so that things turn out better than they otherwise would have. Oh, more seam allowance. So when you find something that appears to be an anomaly with the pattern, you don't want to just go and cut it off or fix it the way you think it's supposed to be. The person that made the pattern probably had a reason for doing what they did, but that's not always true. Sometimes, well, we've all sewn store patterns, commercial patterns, that had a problem that should have been fixed. So I usually like to make this part of a blouse that you sew together so that you get to practice sewing this. So you can see when I line this up here where it belongs, it's a little bit too big on that side. It's too big by that much. So same thing with this, you're going to have a notch there in the center back, you're going to have your edge, a notch on the center back of the yoke, and when you're pinning it together, you'll line up the center and you'll just kind of pull that a little snug and make sure that you put the bigger side down on the plate and the needle on the top, the sewing plate. With the feed dogs, so this gets pulled in and it doesn't look stretched. So each of those sections is controlled by a separate piece, and this one just disappears in with the sleeve. And that is called a multi-dispersion dart. So even though it appears to be smooth and flat, it cups like this around the shoulder area. And one of the reasons that works is that it's a small dart.